Hi.
Hey, Jack. So today we have Jack Gassman from joining us all the way from Wexford in Ireland, and Alessia will be hopefully joining us here in a little bit. She's dealing with a whole mess of things with their horse farm, which is kind of going to be the topic of today's conversation. So welcome, Jack, to the pod. If you want to relieve a little bit of stress, you can explain what's going on with your horses right now.
Just the normal things of having a bunch of horses. We have our own horses, and then we also take care of. We have horses in training coming through, and we have also my parents' horses that we take care of. So we have around 17 to plus horses on the property at any time, and horses get into brawls with each other because they do. And one of the younger thoroughbreds got a kick basically behind the knee, which seemed to be not a problem until it decided to swell up to the size of a baseball, an entire leg get infected, and we're just took her to the vet and dealing with that now. So Sierra's finishing up with that, and she'll probably join soon. Of course, perfect timing as always. Anyway, so yeah, that's part of the I guess maybe the first lesson on horses. They're a lot of work. They do randomly stupid things, and they're like having small children that don't talk, are accident prone, and are 400 kilos.
Yeah.
So that's something I think I've learned from both of you with regards to horsemanship and just taking care of horses, is that a lot of it is like a lot of the practice is nurturing the relationship, right? So like the practice isn't necessarily getting better at technical skills, although there's some of that, right? Like there's plenty of that, but like the practice is like managing this living creature that has behavior and attitude and ways of approaching the world, and a relationship with you, or a relationship with the other horses in the paddock, or whatever. And I think that
we've been joking a lot out at my barn that every time somebody new comes in, it's like Game of Thrones has to start back up out in the field.
Yeah. The constant soap operas. And some of them, like, and it's people underestimate, like, you just can't just move one horse. Like every time you move one horse, it's like you're playing like 3 or 4 dimensional chess, because these two geldings get along together fine until you introduce this mare, or whatever. It's just one of those things. And then you leave and you're like, don't touch anything. And then you do. Surprisingly hard to, So yeah, and then you can never leave. Then you can then it makes it hard to ever leave, because you're worried, something will change or something will happen, and then you'll be dealing with. So yeah, it's about that as you say, there's a lot of things going on always.
Right. They're not just pieces of equipment that you can start up when it's time to get on them, and then turn them off and put them in the shed. And So here's a question, Jack. So tell us about. Obviously you're dealing with some peculiar and particular aspects of your practice right now with regards to Irish insurance, which we'll probably get into later. But like, we'll just sort of, notwithstanding any of those issues, tell us about what it is that you do with regards to Rossfechten, but then also beyond the scope of strictly speaking Rossfechten, because you have a number of different operations going.
So basically, I come from a background. I've kind of always been a little bit involved in horses, growing up, and kind of long before HEMA. My first historical martial arts experience was actually from a guy who was reconstructing Lakota archery and mounted archery while I was still living in Kansas. I was quite young, and he was doing that, and I was fascinated by that, so I did that. And then when we moved to Europe, I ended up getting involved with HEMA, and I found out, wait, there's stuff on horseback, and I was fascinated by that. And I kind of peripherally did some stuff with that, and was trying to figure it out. And then I met my partner Alessia, and her background is kind of from what is kind of known mysteriously as horsemanship. It's basically old American vaquero ranch horsemanship, like old school stuff, and kind of working with her kind of brought it down, the horse side, to a different level. And we kind of went, and the horses were an interesting way to apply, the swords were an interesting way to apply the horsemanship principles when you don't have cows, because most of horsemanship stuff is based around cows. And if you don't have, and we were living in Switzerland, and most of European cattle is dairy, and funnily enough, farmers don't let you chasing around dairy cattle. It may have happened on a few trail rides in Switzerland, because the trails go through the dairy cattle pastures that we may have worked their cows every now and again, but definitely not while they were watching, or else we wouldn't be standing here. But yeah, and that was kind of like where things headed. And then I kind of took a little bit of break. I was in London kind of doing film work and various acting things and doing more sword stuff. And then moved to Ireland together, and we went, let's do live kind of theater, involving, HEMA as for stage combat and horsemanship, and trying to do horse stunts and jousting and various stuff, and get paid for it. And it was going quite well until COVID. And now it's made things very complicated for live shows. But we also teach here. Every now and again we do Rossfechten boot camps for people coming in who are interested in getting into the kind of getting a start into it. We want, when we do it, James did one with us. We really want it to be like giving people an idea of where the path forward is, and that they could kind of go and start working on their own. They know what exercises to work on and kind of where they stand with it. And then there's also, I continue to teach HEMA, and I travel a fair amount for that. So that's always good to kind of get that info coming back. And it's been a very much a two-way street for me as far as the fencing and the horse work. A lot of how I teach and a lot of stuff come in from the horsemanship into my fencing. That has influenced my coaching style an awful lot. It's actually probably been more in my fencing has been more informed by the horse work than my horse work has than my fencing has informed my horse work by a large degree. But yeah, of course, the horse fencing stuff very much influences a lot of how I think about the Rossfechten. And it very much, my background competitively and fighting a whole bunch of people around from different communities has also made me really think about what's really vital for when you're actually, if you want to do Rossfechten for seriously, it was like for the sources and stuff, what's the real things that you'd want to be looking for. And it comes down to basics. And it's the same thing that the horsemanship is interested in, is, doing small things well. It doesn't matter how fancy it is. If it's, it needs to be fast. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be smooth. You know, if the movement is stiff and not supple, then it's a problem. You know, which is not a problem in a show. Like the bigger the movement, the stiffer it looks. Usually, in some ways, the more crowd appeal it draws. You know, when you're going to stage combat, you have to change a whole bunch. You know, and I think that one, if we may go into it later, one thing that the horsemanship has very much kept that other horsemanship hasn't is it's very job focused, very goal oriented. As far as a practical third party outcome, most modern horsemanship styles tend to be very performative. And when you come from a performative background, that colors everything you do. Like as someone who works as both like stage combat and I'm going to hit you with the sword, whatever the hell you want to do about it, fencing. There's a huge gap, and there's assumptions you make going into that just conversation that completely change how you think about everything. So
yeah. Well, let's start there then. You know, as far as like where we could take the conversation, because you've said a lot of interesting things. Multiple podcasts worth of things, but like, let's differentiate then between the idea of doing something performatively versus doing something goal orientedly. And like, I can think about, like, I have much less horse experience than you, but like, even with what I'm doing, like, for instance, if I want to set up cones to work around, and I get on my horse and go pick up the cones and put them where I want, I have a lot more success getting my horse where I want than if I don't have a cone and I'm just trying to like get my horse there magically without a purpose, right? And so it's fascinating to me how much clarity I'm going to put this thing there brings for my horse, I guess. Something in me changes something for her, right? Because she doesn't know what I want to do. So yeah, like I dig on what you're saying, but I'd love to hear you go more deeply into that.
I want to say a thing just so that we record it. These podcasts are like a repository for what I think could be good ideas, and most of them I'm sure are not. But as long as I record all of them, then when I go back later and try and figure out what the good stuff was, I might be able to. But like, you're talking about clarity. You're talking about clarity of purpose and how somehow you communicate that to the horse, and it makes the whole thing more effective, right? And so like there is this sort of it's not just nonverbal, but there's a sort of a subconscious communication of purpose, right? Or like you're not, because when we're trying to be as clear as we can when we're articulating an idea or something, we tend to do that by drawing out, right? Like by like expanding what we're like saying, all of the various details, we try and put words to them. But like, this is the opposite of that, and yet somehow we're communicating more information, right? Like we're communicating more information to the horse just by having this desire to pick up these cones, right? Like all of a sudden there's all of this, not just nonverbal, but subconscious communication of ideas and concepts and goals, right, to this horse, and they get it, right? They're picking up on all of these things that we haven't gone out of our way to articulate, or at least we have, or we have in as much as like we have this desire, and then that comes through. Sorry. So now that's, I wanted to make sure that I said that out loud, because I think that there's fertile ground there for exploration. But Jack, go ahead and answer Jesse's question.
Yeah, that was a very meta discussion right there. I think one thing that that definitely there's on the cones, there's definitely a couple of things going on there. I think it's like, one, you have clarity of purpose. So it's also, you can just even on a sports science point of view, they've found that there's a difference between what they call internal cueing and external cueing. Like there's a different, like if you tell an athlete, raise your hand, you're going to get a, versus point at the sun, you're going to get a very different quality of response. So just for yourself, you're going to get a change. And then for your releases are going to be much clearer. So like, just to backtrack, in horsemanship, you have the concept of what's called a release. So you ask for something, and then when the horse gets closer to what you want, you release the pressure and stop asking. It's like, so, it's basically hot and cold if you can only say hot.
Yeah.
Right. So you're in and how you play with that stimulus is another question.
So I mean, so there's a sense in which maybe because of the way that you have your goal, the way that you set up your goal, that you're more attentive to where those releases should come, right?
Yeah, and like I see it even in fencing, HEMA coaching. If I, as a coach, know exactly what I want from that to change in that fencer to get them to do better, I can do it in 6 words or less. Or I can introduce an exercise that will do it without me saying anything. If I don't know exactly what I want out of that fencer, I will spend 5 minutes talking to them, because I'm trying to convince myself what I want, rather than, and the athlete then has no fucking clue what I want. They just listen to 5 minutes of rambling. And they're cool, their pulse is now lowered, their joints have cooled down, they're not as flexible, they don't know, they lost the track of whatever they're thinking. So, it's very, very similar. And like and then I think there's also just the fact that horses aren't, they're not machines. So if they see a cone and there's nothing else going on, and you go like, you're pointing in that general direction, they're going to go, huh, I've gone around a lot of cones in my life. They probably want me to go to the cone.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot context can do. Like we started playing polo cross just for the crack, which is basically lacrosse on horseback.
Yeah.
Which is a way more interesting for your Rossfechten than polo, because a lot more turns. A lot more stop and go, but yeah, you can get some stuff just from following a ball, and the polo, doing it in a match, you can get changes that would be much harder to get if you just were riding in the arena, because the horse has the context. The turn is easier because the horse knows to follow the ball if you've prepared the situation and you've maintained the stress to a manageable degree, which is that's another big question, maintaining stress levels to where people are kind of, on a sports science technique terminology, aroused but not completely moved, which is like one of the big questions, life in the feet, as they say. Did that answer your question? It's a bit rambly.
Oh no, I think so. And I'm reminded of last time I was out at the barn. My coach was talking with me about cowboy dressage tests, right? Like, not pure dressage, but cowboy dressage, for anybody that pays attention. And we did one just for giggles. Like, it's not my focus, but we thought we'd see how it went. And so she was discussing with me that, like, some people feel like you shouldn't run the test multiple times with your horse, because then the horse will learn to anticipate. And then, what are you displaying? And she explained, her thought was that, heck yeah, run it through with your horse, because what you're displaying is the fact that the horse has learned it, does know, is anticipating what you want, but waits for you. And that alone is a good sign. So
yeah, I mean that last caveat, but waits for you is a big caveat.
Yeah.
That's the perennial film horse issue. Okay, on action we gallop across the field.
Yeah.
First time it's fine. Second time it's fine. Third time, all the horses are like, 5 seconds. They're just 5 seconds out from action. They're just already like hopped off their minds.
Yeah.
In terre, all the high school maneuvers that you'd love to see, but then they just, and then the moment action, like they just go Mach 3, and suddenly all the stunt horses are just riding over the actor who is supposed to be in front, and so yeah, that waiting for you is much harder than it sounds. But yeah, I mean, like, that is again the question, like that performative question of like, if you're coming at it from a like this, I'm training for an unpredictable circumstance where I will have to react in moment to a changing situation because of what an opponent or cow or whatever is doing. You wouldn't want to be going down that road too much.
Right.
And like there are, there's stories of horses where like the anticipation bites them in the ass, because also, smart show circuits will change details last minute, and then to see if the horse is listening to you. But if you're looking to just impress a prince, or win a rosette in a show, or do your jousting show and earn money that way, because fine, anticipate away. But if you're gonna be like, I'm trying to understand how Rossfechten works, then you'd want to have it in a context of an understandable job. And I think that is actually going into where the origins of dressage, because I find it interesting just on a purely historical level when dressage manuals start to exist. Because dressage manuals come into being, Grisone is kind of like the first one. It's 1550.
Right.
And it's you have between 1500 and 1600 this really interesting military shift, where it goes from the cavalry's heavy feudal, quote unquote, feudal cavalry. So whether it's Konstabler in the cities or just feudal nobility, their main job is to go out in lances and do basically spec ops raids. They go behind enemy raids, like they occupy a position, or they burn till the infantry gets there, or they take a castle, burn something, kidnap someone. If you go and compare what medieval cavalry is meant to do compared to modern militaries, those are all special operations missions. Like you don't just send line infantry to do those things. You send people who are experienced and trustworthy operating in small teams away from any kind of support. And that's quite a big ask. And then what you have in post 1500 is, with the change and focus on larger armies, the kind of cash economy catches up with medieval society. Land no longer has its economic value, and everything is about controlling cities in warfare. Cities are shit if you want to defend in a siege. They've got too much frontage. So you fight on the field. And then you need field cavalry formations. Once you have field cavalry formations as a regular thing, not just like every 50 years you have a field battle and then you just figure it out on the day. You see formation, you see command and control changing, you see armament changing, you see everything changing for this new objective of we have to field battles. And we have money to do it, not just like up people. And that's the same time you get dressage. And if you are moving in formation, if you've ever done formation stuff, it's okay if you're like, even if you're like 4 people, it's pretty, formation quadrilla stuff is, horses can take cues off each other if it's like,
Yeah.
but if you're 2 or 3 ranks deep, there's no way you or the horse is actually reacting to a situation. It's on this horn blast or on the orders of the officer, you do X.
Right.
And if you want to then show your worth, you want to show your ability to react to commands and your horse to react to commands. There's a reason why in nomad cultures, like, you don't get as much focus on the concept of, I'm gonna ride and do this thing. Maybe you'll do a couple shows, but if you look at working equestrian cultures, generally they have games, like moving parts games. That's how you judge your skill level of your participants. You have your rodeos, you have your gaucho games, in Australia you have your polo cross. Because if you're going to be doing a changing game, you want to see whether, if you hire this guy, whether he can react to a changing situation. If you want to put him in a formation, you want to see whether he can take orders and also how good he looks. Because let's be honest, most formation battles are won before contact.
Yeah.
Right? You win the fight before contact, because there's a lot of accounts of, the classic thing of, there's very, very few actual accounts of French columns making contact with line infantry, because most of them just see the mass of infantry coming and just leg it. So also for cavalry to strike home, the horse needs to see that the infantry is scared of them.
Right.
If the cavalry does not, you saw this even just horse to horse, right?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but if there's a line of infantry and there's no holes, the horse if he's going to run into that, he needs to be sure that the other people are scared of him. They want to know that he'll move. The horse will move the infantry's feet, not the infantry move their feet.
Yeah.
So formations, you kind of need that. Whereas if you're fighting in small groups, okay, they've formed into either it's a shallow enough formation you could probably ride through. You can see the other end of this for the other side of the formation. And 15th century tactical manuscripts say don't charge unless you can see the other side of the formation. If it's like so deep that or there's an obstacle behind, don't charge because you can't go through, and then you're fucked. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an interesting change there, because horses can understand small unit combat. They get chasing, being chased. They get all this stuff probably better than half the people involved. And they will also immediately clock usually whether or not they will win this encounter, which is kind of your problem. If you're riding,
part of what horsemanship in this context is like learning or teaching the horse that they need to listen to you rather than their intuition.
Yeah.
Or maybe you want to listen to their intuition. On the other hand, sometimes when I think about, if you have both your political class, both your military and your political class, it's really a smart idea to put them on sensible horses who won't engage in stupid scenarios. Right? Because if you lose that Duke, you're pretty fucked. So, you might want to put them on something that has no stake in, cultural stakes. It just knows if I go there, those guys look scary and we are badly outnumbered. I don't care about dying in a glorious last stand. I didn't sign up for this. Because I think, a horse, if it doesn't think it'll win this, won't engage. That's just, if it doesn't think it'll win the fight, it won't go in. Some horses are crazy and think they will win every single fight you point them at. And that can be a problem too. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just like picturing my herd, not my herd, but the herd that I know. And yeah, there's a couple of crazy ones out there for sure.
you know. So like it's and sometimes when you're doing Rossfechten, it's a lot of times the more nervous ones tend to be a little bit more reactive and can therefore be a bit more easier to direct sometimes. But if they also understand positioning. So if they understand if they're behind the other horse and riding up behind it and chasing it, you know, then most of their power is annulled. So like sometimes less confident horses, you can still do it, but you just have to understand that their objective is not a frontal pass. You use the fact that they don't want to accept a frontal pass to deny engagement until you can find a superior position. You know, so it's, you know, and there's the higher the level of training involved, you know, generally the more confident they are, you know, because, you know, horses are living creatures too. So, you know, if they walk in knowing that they're the biggest, strongest, fastest, most maneuverable, it's going to have an effect on their confidence. You know, so it's all those kind of like, there's a like.
So
I just say that it's like. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, so I want to. So you spent some time talking about how it is that dressage develops, right? And you began with this idea that American horsemanship, or at least traditional American horse, the vaquero horsemanship, may embody some of the features of more traditional European horsemanship, more, you know, sort of the type of horsemanship that we presume was used during the period that the Rossfechten treaties and manuscripts and were written and being used regularly. So what I'd like you to explain a little bit more about how that lineage evolves, right? So how the lineage of American horsemanship evolves, and then how it becomes what it is today. Because I think what we would call it today, or like the more modern technical term for this system, is like natural horsemanship, right? The horsemanship of the Dorrance brothers and Ray Hunt and Buck Brenneman, right? So
Yeah.
But they didn't invent it, right? Like this is something that
So basically with the Spanish came over in the early 16th century and started brought over loads of horses. One of the exports of the New World was actually horses, because you had all this land. You know, beef became an export. And so very quickly you had massive cattle ranches in the Spanish occupied parts of the U.S., and you had lots of cavalry, Spanish cavalry coming in and expanding, creating haciendas, etc. And a lot of when you look at really old school vaquero, which basically Spanish cowboy, you have the vaquero tradition in Spain, the vaquero tradition in the US, and there's a lot of very strong similarities in tack, in training, in everything else going on. That the bits are very, very similar. When you look at spade bits in the high level vaquero tradition, they're basically medieval war bits. The saddles function almost exactly the same. There's a lot going on with how you ride, the connection with the long leg and connection with the stirrup to allow you the hip rotation to swing a rope. Very similar. You maintain that rotational capability for rotational power generation. There's a lot of stuff going on. And then that kind of translates. You even actually have, if you look up the Segaser Hide, there's actually a really interesting depiction of Native Americans armed and outfitted as European heavy cavalry being used as auxiliary troops to fight other Native Americans from the early 1600s. So there was active training in the native. They're actively training the Native Americans to fight as cavalry, and so like these spreads and these small outfits owned by a lord basically hire cowboys to ride, and in some cases fight for them in these wilderness areas on territorial disputes, based on their ability to ride and, be tough. It continues until the, kind of the 20th century. And then you get kind of like the modern harbingers of horsemanship, the Ray Hunt, the Dorrance brothers, and so they're these kind of semi-legendary figures who we have some mystical information from, but not. And then the next generation is very prolific. And the Dorrance brothers, like, they started traveling, doing clinics to spread this horsemanship because they saw it was dying out since practical ranches were dying out, this way of life was dying out. And also they saw there was, in general, there had always been kind of like hard cowboys, soft cowboys, but there was a loss of, like, it's better to talk to people who actually were there for this. But from what I've understood, talking to some of these people, is felt with the change from the ranch culture, people were losing that kind of partnership with the horse that was necessary for getting the job done, in some cases, and they wanted to share that and preserve that. And as they spread this knowledge in clinics, it kind of, some people, it started getting taken up more and more by people who are a little bit more savvy with how to teach it to people, because the horsemanship method of teaching is not very it's very strict in the fact that it doesn't mince words, it doesn't protect you from anything, and it expects you to do things right, and expects you to kind of put everything you want aside for the long-term goal of the horse. That is not an easy sell to consumers. You're always wrong. You're going to be spending a lot of money. This is going to be a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
The dream sales pitch. And it's not even like, you're going to have a great, your relationship will improve, but like actually improving relationships involves hard conversations sometimes. And a lot of customers who will come to you who need to improve their relationship will have to start off with a lot of hard conversations with their horse. And that's also not a great sell. So the next, natural horsemanship as a term kind of came in as a way of also putting a brand on what's going on, because it's really hard to put a brand on horsemanship. People stubbornly call it horsemanship. And my contention is this is in the era of Google search terms, probably the worst thing you can do. Like,
yeah.
And like, I have to, like, when we have clients, a lot of times like, okay, so you teach people how to, take care of horses and clean their feet. Like, it's in Ireland where this is completely unknown. In German speaking, in non-English speaking countries, this works way better because horsemanship is not a used term. So
right.
it's like
right.
The term in English, but it's a little bit more tricky.
We hear horsemanship, and we think the skills attributed to like riding a horse,
taking care of it, or
right? so, and Jesse, you were like nodding emphatically, and I wanted to ask you from your perspective, because you're sort of regard yourself as being embedded within this lineage, right? You have your, I mean, right? So, as such as so, in as much as you understand it, right? Like you do have, I think the person who you would regard as the most formative horseman in your experience, right, would be sort of a second generation of this natural horsemanship, right? How does Harry fit?
Yeah, Harry Whitney is kind of the person for where my pathway upwards stops, as far as I know. But I don't know who all Harry rode with, trained with, all of that. I mean, that's a little obscure to me. I'm riding with him again this November, so maybe I'll get to ask if I get.
Yeah. He's part of the Nuremberg tradition. Or is he
Exactly.
Right.
But I mean, but yeah, whether or not like he would consider himself like, or whether he's a student or in the tradition, I mean, boy, that gets fuzzy, right? Especially since we're used to talking about martial arts here.
Right.
But I don't know how he'd regard himself. But the art is the same, right? Like everything you told me about what you did with Jack and Alicia, all is completely in alignment with like how my barn works and how I'm being taught to do things. I mean, not as to your point, Jack, not many barns who are interested in making money would have allowed me to wander a field crying for 2 hours trying to catch my horse. Whereas my coach was like, have a great time. You'll figure it out one of these days. Right? So,
and normally they expect you, it's just like one of those, oh shit, we should probably step in and do something, or like, it just one of those things. You just, and like we even
figured it out. I did get there, right?
Yeah, like,
and it's not been a problem since. Me and my horse had this conversation and we got it worked out,
Yeah, it's funny. So that was part of the Rossfechten boot camp, and thank God that Jack and Alicia have their horses trained up to such an extent that it mostly wasn't an issue gathering up the horses to start the day. But and also like the difference would be if you're taking a student for an hour, right, and you have and this is their one time a week that they're going to do their horsemanship, such as it is, then it's probably not practical to say, hey, by the way, this is part of the art, right? Like, so part of the art is understanding how horses live out there, right? And also understanding that somebody has to go get them. and like, you need to know what that experience is like.
Yeah, I mean, like with you guys, it was important for us to, like, we had you for 5 days, and that was, of all the things to work on, it might be strange that we spent so much time on working with you guys, tacking up a horse, on going and getting them. But it was important for us that you had that kind of like nose to tail experience of it, because it's kind of everything that goes in. And yeah, when you're like most of the time when we have just like, normal riding school clients, which we do every now and again, we take the kids because corrupt them young. But like the tricky, like it's a long time before we'll let them take a horse out of the paddock or put it, because those are it's the takeoff and landing moments usually where things can go the worst, like the wrong horse getting out in the wrong moment, can, cripple another horse for life, or, you tie them wrong to the wrong thing, cripple them for life. It's there's an amount of unconscious responsibility that goes on that people just kind of that is very non-consumer. Like, you know, that you just kind of like, and it's not even something that you control. Even if you're like doing BJJ, you can do a severe amount of damage, but it's still a physical action you make, right? It's not that you do something that seems completely okay, walk away, and then all hell breaks loose and you can't control the storm. Like, it's a very different thing, and you have to be very careful about it. But for us, it was important that you guys, and I think I may have terrorized you and the group a little bit on that first day on how dangerous and how, you know, weighty consequences are. But I kind of,
well, I didn't. Yeah, I think, well, part of it is that we had a pretty I think our group, the mentality was
it was
already
a really good group.
I think we were already just generally not nervous, not apprehensive per se, but like recognized the gravity of what was going on, and having the response. You know what it's reminding me of? So I work for Arms and Armor, you know, and part of my job is to put swords in the hands of Renaissance Fair patrons, right? Which run a wide spectrum of competency in terms of handling weapons, but also, you know, various states of inebriation that are sometimes more and less apparent. And so, like, it's an exceedingly, I mean, it has catastrophic potential, we'll say, right? But generally, there are very, very safe practices that you know that you can observe when you're running a sword shop at a Renaissance fair, and mostly you just observe them. It becomes a natural way of engaging, but it's not something that you just take someone off the street and say, okay, you know, this is your job, do these things, right? No, it's like you have to have been in the shop, you have to have handled weapons, you have to have gotten used to not just like the movement patterns, the muscle memory of like how you hand someone a sword, although that is, you know, part of it, but also like when it's appropriate to hand someone a sword, and what type of customers are going to be trouble, you know, just based on the way that they walk in the door, right? And I'm
having so many like working a Ren Fair flashbacks right now. It's real intense. Yeah.
Right. But again, all of this is sort of like, you just have to, you know, you can tell someone like, listen, if you tie this this halter, or if you tether this halter a certain way, you could potentially maim this horse for the rest of its life, right? But, you know, but the real way you do it is you have them tether it, and then you say, this is wrong, and you do it again, and you know, and like they just have to have gone through the practice of like, no, this is problematic, and they have to see it, and then sometimes they have to experience screwing it up and watching some consequences, hopefully not the kind of consequences that are going to hurt, that's going to leave anything hurt, but you know, see, like we were clear about this. You shouldn't have done it this way, and this is what happens, right?
Yeah. No, there's those kind of things going on all the time, and it is that thing, like, and I think there's there's a certain amount of responsibility around being a teacher in those situations, where I think that's very important to me also as a martial arts coach and a fencer. Like, for me, it's a really big deal. Certain skill sets are really big deals for me. Like, I don't want to send someone into a competition until I am confident if I throw any kind of power strike as a direct attack at their head, they will, with a 90% probability, be able to parry. Because if I don't, like, if I don't put them through their paces where I feel confident, any really obvious hard strikes are going to get parried, so that the small stuff is what's they're going to hit them. I'm not going to encourage them to go in, because otherwise I'm inviting concussion. If you're putting a boxer into a ring and they can't, if they don't know what to do with a haymaker, and it half the time it rocks them, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
So like, I think and that's sometimes we've been a victim of our success in HEMA sometimes, that we see competing as a right, not a privilege.
That
right. Yeah. And we see it as sort of the expression of our practice, right? Like, that's like, this, you want to do HEMA. This is what it means to do HEMA. You go out and
you go on the weekend and you compete, and for me, like, in the entirety of HEMA, where it's like, for me, competing is like, it's the competitors are a small sub team of the larger HEMA chain, and they're important in part. They're crucial, just like the rest of the other links in the chain, but not everybody's suited to do that, and you shouldn't like make it the only job. Like, if NASA just made everybody an astronaut, you wouldn't have a space program. Like,
right.
And not everybody should be an astronaut. If you're puking your guts out the moment you look at the comet, you shouldn't be going up there. If you can't tell this, a 8 millimeter from a 7 millimeter, bolt, you shouldn't be going there, because that will get you killed. And that's okay. Like, a physicist shouldn't be judged as an astronaut, and you shouldn't judge your astronauts as physicists, and your launch program people and your logistics people, and are all different things, different skills that you should all respect. But just because the astronaut goes on TV doesn't mean that you just shove everybody towards being an astronaut, because you're setting up some really horrible stuff, and you're killing your space program. Because, like, we need, like, every club should have, the best clubs I've known always magically end up with a really amazing interpreter, a really amazing translator, a really amazing coach, a team, someone who's just basically the spirit of the entire club, whether they do anything or not. They're the reason people show up. A guy who goes out and, fights and tests the interpretations and then comes back, hey, interpreter, this is broken. We need to fix it. Why? Well, look at this. Because it is one of those things, like, and then you also have the person who's running the club and who's actually doing all the nitty-gritty logistical details, who never gets any credit. And they're ones who also organize the events. And generally, unfortunately, they tend to be, for whatever reason, women in the club who that, and then never get any credit. So, just to lay the cards on the table.
Well, this is the topic of the next podcast that we'll have you on for. But seriously, there is also, even in bringing it back to the horses, there's a supply chain and a linkage in skill sets that you have in your horses, and each specialty is really answerable to the rest of them in keeping each other safe. Like, the tack is important. If you buy faulty tack or you're sold faulty tack, you can get you killed. Your trainer is important. Everybody, and especially as a teacher, you need to be keeping in mind of what's going on and what you're risking, and also what you're risking if you're not exposing people. Like, if you never expose someone to risk is going to find them sometime. Right? A horse is going to spook at some point. If they've never ridden a horse at full gallop, the horse spooks. They have the adrenaline dump and they panic.
things can go wrong then, in really fatal ways. Like, so there's, if you don't expose them to have the seat to handle unpredictable things, because you don't want to create risk, you are generating more risk down the road. The check's going to come sometime. You're just putting it on the tab.
Yeah, I mean, boy, that is absolutely true. I mean, not only just in horses, but James and I have talked quite a bit about parenting in this podcast, and it's the same thing there too. But I was particularly struck as you were talking, thinking about just recently. My coach was saying, the horse. I call her my horse. She's not my horse, but she's not super trained. And my coach was saying, I know some days you get frustrated, but I've really done you a service, because you will never think you're better than you are.
Yeah.
Because if I put you on a great horse, you would think you were really good, and you're not.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I think so. There's so many things to say. So like I've got 3 different branches that I want to take this down at some point. So one of them is just like this idea of community and understanding the role of various members of the community. Like that's such an important conversation that needs to be fleshed out. And remember that our own practice or our own art is sort of embedded within a broader context of a group of people achieving things. So like that's such an important idea that we need to spend lots of time with. The other thing is having like realistic, like having a realistic sense of the world. And by realistic, I mean like just like generally speaking, what you believe your behavior will result in, it will actually result in that, right? Like I don't care if it's true or not true or whatever, but like having a reliable ability to predict how your actions will impact the world and interact with the phenomena that you encounter, so that you could, and like and that's also important. And it's very easy as coaches or teachers or just friends, right, to like impart bad wisdom, right, to like teach, even if everything that we're saying is actually true, we could communicate the wrong truth to someone who is missing huge pieces of the puzzle and doesn't really understand how their insights, or like the sort of the consequences that their insights are invariably or inevitably leading them to, which could be catastrophic, right? So like your coach knows that in order to give you a realistic sense of how your horsemanship is, that they give you a horse that won't respond when you're doing things poorly, right?
Absolutely.
And now and that's huge. And that's also true in terms of fencing, and it's just true in terms of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's in the horse world, there's a really big and interesting divide between people who work with, there's a big difference between working with a horse that is like, has been bred from the perfect to do whatever you're doing, has been raised pretty much perfectly, has gotten a 3 or 4 year, maybe it's even a 6-month foundation, but that foundation is actually 5 years, because the horse is 5 and it's been at that place for 5 years. And for 5 years, it's been, these are the rules, these are the boundaries, these are what this means, clear communication. And there's just 5 years of, like figuring out how the world works and how to exist in a human's world, which a lot of horses end up learning how to exist in a human's world rather than humans learning how to exist with the horses.
Absolutely.
And there's a big difference between working that way and where you can get in how much time working with one of those horses, versus working with a horse that may not be, like, didn't have a lot of those things going in. And even like I'm not talking about like, and like they were even not even that they were abused, but that they weren't handled by people who live and breathe everything that's going on, where they're watching every single detail of everything that's going on at every moment. And the moment a tiny issue comes up, it's immediately corrected and set on a, you can do completely different things. And this is like a top 10% of horses, that are like, and then the rest of them. So like, same as a coach, you can get someone who was varsity, wrestling team, and then also happened to have done like 3 or 4 years of dance because they had to, and then they did this, and then they also did some sport fencing for the college credits, and maybe they're ex-military, like whatever. And then you go like, do this thing, and they go, boo, 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 and like, I'm a great coach.
Yes.
Or maybe they came from a different club that was also had a really great coach. On top of all those things, you're like, wow, I'm really good, or someone who like, you look at them and like, okay, there's a mobility issue there that we have to correct first. There's no structural strength. They've never done anything physical. So the moment I swing a sword at them, the adrenaline dump hits, and they've never had an adrenaline dump. So that scares the shit out of them. So now they're crying and now they're embarrassed. Okay, how do we deal with this now?
Yeah.
And that's, those are completely different skill sets.
Yes.
But on the other hand, what you do see is when the shit hits the fan, the top athletes and the top horses can regress to a state very similar to the other type very quickly, like with stress. If the stress,
yes.
And you can also burn them if you don't watch the rules. If you don't treat them in some ways like you would the other horse, you will burn them and frazzle their mind.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, which is this idea that that a lot of our experience is going from this place of like where we can comfortably and reliably predict the way that our behavior will interact with phenomena and the impact it will have on the world, and versus like other places where we've lost control. We don't understand why things are happening or even what is happening, and that's like the difference between safe, social, and fight or flight. And that a lot of the point of our practice is to expand what it is that we can begin to understand, right? So what we can predict, how we can predict our behavior will impact phenomena. And so like so just because we have a very, very strong command of the things within our box, right, doesn't mean that something outside of our box won't leave us with severe trauma, right, in some cases, right? So just and it might be, and it also might be the kind of thing like maybe it's not that big of a deal, right? So like you take someone who grew up in an environment where basically things are chaos from the start, and they're fine with the craziest random shit that goes on because they just understand how to live in that space, right? Whereas if you take someone who is quote unquote perfect, and then you give them something that you say a normal person would just be like, dude, relax, it's not a big deal. But that could be the end of the world for them because it's just something that they hadn't accounted for and hadn't prepared for. And they don't understand how to fail, right? They don't understand how to have made the wrong choice and how to suffer, and so like, so talking about like the horse that lives in chaos or grows up in chaos, essentially, right, may not be the easiest horse to develop these finely attuned skills or whatever, but also they might not fully break down if they're challenged by some experience that they don't necessarily know how to deal with, right? Versus
It's one of those really tricky ones because then you have to really separate between trauma and chaos. Because like, okay, like the reason I'm grinning every time you say there's something that shouldn't be a big deal.
Right. We don't know exactly.
I have
an absurd idea.
I'm going to tell you a very practical story. We had a horse in training a couple months ago. Like her brain got fried by, she was a great jumper, but then a combination of an owner that didn't set boundaries and didn't make her feel safe because she didn't set boundaries for the horse. So if she can't set boundaries with the horse, that means anybody who's going to attack her, the horse, it will not be stopped by the owner, because if the owner isn't strong enough to stop the horse, the owner won't be strong enough to stop people trying to hurt the horse, because the horse is already stronger than the other people. So why would I need a bodyguard who's weaker than I am?
Right.
So, and then also just jump, and without any on pressure. So anyway, we're working on like introducing things and, okay, bringing them to a stress state and then bringing them back, stress state, bring them back. And you're okay. You've learned how to deal with this, and like, it gets pretty dramatic at the beginning. And it's a very, very fine line between introducing them to the trouble, as we say, and crossing the line into trauma. Like it's and some horses, there's a line that's this big. Some horses, it's that big.
And but just to be clear, that's true of people, right? So like this is a metaphor for
like horses and people are exactly the same as far as I'm concerned. Like they just, but the story gets even better. Like, so I got a horse. We have a horse that he's great for. He's why I ended up in the horsemanship, because we got him because someone else couldn't deal with him, and he was a great horse, amazingly athletic, Spanish Mustang Stallion when we got him. So they're very similar to a lot of the Spanish. They were brought over by genetic fossils of what the Spanish brought over, more or less. So they're very many. They're very fun. But this guy was just range bred. He grew up with a bunch of other stallions running. He basically came off, the worst streets of New York, used to fight, or, either. And so I was not where I needed to be to have talked to him. And it took a while to kind of get things going on. And he's also just one of those people, like if he was a human, you'd walk into his house and everything would be fucking meticulous. And he'd be very chill, and he'd probably be a pothead until you said the wrong thing, and then he would beat the living shit out of you. First, he'd go nuts and panic, and then beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And he, and he getting to the point where I can do Rossfechten with him was a journey, and taught me a lot of things. And he likes his precision dressage and stuff, and he enjoys that. The chaos, not so much. But we said, okay, well, we're putting all these bottles and stuff on this horse in training. Have we ever done it with Book? Yeah, I think we have. I'll be fine with it now. It's, he's a progressive trainer. We'll just find it out. Talking about assumptions, we put it on. And so, the way you do this usually is you hang the plastic bottle on the end of the lasso. You loop it over the horn so you can move it around. You can flick it off if it gets too much and you're getting towards that line of like trauma. So we put a couple of rocks in the bottle, just so loop it over the horn. I step back. He looks at it. When he looks at it, it moves, and there's a clack from the rocks, and he spins. Spins on one foot, like before I can take a full step back. He's gotten himself wrapped in that lasso 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
There's no flicking it off. And in that moment, that horse, whether it was true or not, thought that bottle was trying to kill him, and I put that killer bottle on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, whether or not that's true is completely irrelevant to the situation. After 4 years of trust, I tried to kill him. That is just the facts. because I made an assumption too quickly and I skipped 3 steps.
Yeah.
Like, and that was on me. And those are the things, and you can end up doing that kind of shit with your students in fencing very quickly. Does that mean you don't? But does that mean you don't expose them? So when someone walks up with a Coke bottle during a show and shakes it, that the horse does the same thing and you're on it? Right. You have to balance that. You have
to attempt to be as careful as you can to understand what a person or a horse is working with, and to do, and there isn't a science to it. It's an art of understanding who and what you're dealing with and doing the best that you can to slowly, in a way that keeps them safe, expands what they can manage. Right. And sometimes you make mistakes because it is not a science, and you have to learn.
Yeah. It's just one of those things, because I got spoiled with a horse that enjoyed out games and enjoyed playthings at the beginning. And so I'm an impatient person, so I can end up skipping steps too quickly. So that procedures will help you in those things. But again, what you're saying, it's about expanding, the tolerance. And I guess one thing I was trying to say earlier with that, discussion versus people who are naturally gifted versus people who may not be or may not have gotten the support as early. I'm big into listening to strength and conditioning coaches, especially the ones that work with top teams, because mostly they're interested in structural strength and, more complex issues going on, rather than just, okay, we put more weight on the bar and do it again. They're interested in finding the cracks, right? And one of the ones I love listening to is Movement Podcast. And one of the great quotes I love is, there's no rehab. There's only strength training with lower weight. Right. It's not that when you're coming back from physio that all of a sudden your body works completely differently. You're just starting a lower point. So all the rules that you are watching when you start with lower weight and going in are exactly the same rules you should be watching, more or less, when you're trying to get that last step. That last step, getting that extra 10 kg on the bar may or may not be an issue of just pushing harder. There may be a flexibility issue in somewhere, or a supporting issue or something, or it may be that you need to take a longer rest period. There's all the same things. So it's just a lot less forgiving at the lower end than it is at the higher end, because one reason people get to the higher end is because you can kind of fuck up with them with a high error of margin and be okay. So they get farther, because perfect coaches are non-existent and good coaches are rare. So if, a lot of times the horses that get in a professional capacity get to a really high level and tend not to be necessarily the most athletic, or they tend to be the ones that can tolerate bullshit best. Same thing as in people professionally. Someone may be an amazing programmer, but they cannot tolerate corporate bullshit. They will not get very far in a corporate ladder, right? They might start their own thing and go independent and become a consultant or something, but they won't rise in a corporate ladder and become a CEO.
That's great.
There's just different things that you're trying when you work. That stress level is exactly the same. There's not low stress people and then everybody else. It's just you're working at a higher level, and you may have to build it up from lower, or you can start higher.
Right.
And they'll go into the same states. If you overstress a high performer or someone who's new, it's exactly the same chemical states.
Yeah.
Yes.
It may even be worse for the high performer because they're not used to it, as James says.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you have to build resiliency, right? And Lord knows I have seen top level HEMA people meltdown. I think we probably all have, right? So I mean, yeah, that absolutely can happen.
Like, and funnily enough, it's usually the meltdown stuff is like the plastic bottle. It has nothing to do with the core issue.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I think
absolutely.
I think that's honestly a good place to leave this discussion. But I think Jack and Alessia wasn't able to make it for us today, but I think we'd definitely like to have you and or Alessia back on because there's so many
I'd
different.
definitely like to get Alessia on because it didn't work out today, but she's, as far as the horses go, she's the real genius that's actually there, and you don't see her on events because someone has to take care of the horses, and also random gyms full of sweaty, stinky people is not always an easy sell. And there's no horses, so why would you even go? But that's an argument I can't really counter, to be honest. But yeah, no, she's the one you would really want to be talking to on a lot of this stuff. I've just basically been along for the journey on how things really stack up, and there's so much on how I coach that has come from the horsemanship, especially basically the last thing I'd like to people maybe to think about, we can talk about maybe some other time, is treat your body like it's a horse. If you're trying to teach your spot, you're not trying to teach, when you're fencing, you're not trying to teach your brain things, you're trying to teach your body things. And your body has very similar things to a horse. The reason why you may not be pulling off that thrust is because your body doesn't trust you not to give it a concussion when you try it. You're not trying to teach your brain how it works. You're trying to make your body feel that this is safe and powerful and will keep, and when things go wrong, it can rely on this to not get it hurt. So I think if you think about it in that terms and train it like you would a horse, you'll have a lot more success with your fencers.
Awesome.
I love it.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you.
Have you.